The Mandela effect. What is it? What effects does it have on your life? And do you remember any of these things that I'm going to talk about now? A lot of people know it just by the mass misremembering of a bunch of different things by a bunch of different people. And I do have a lot of different examples. You may have heard it for the Berenstain Bears, how a lot of people remember it being the Berenstain. It's actually the Berenstain Bears. There's some people on YouTube and different social media sites that have amazing videos on it saying, I definitely remember this when I was a kid. Go check out James Rolfe from Cinemassacre. I think he had a really good video on it. But this is kind of talking about it in a more factual and kind of spiritual way, and I'll actually let you know what it is exactly. So it's named after somebody called Nelson Mandela. And he was a lawyer in Johannesburg, and growing up in Johannesburg as a black man was insanely difficult. So he became an incredible human rights activist, and because he was so passionate and he would speak out against how things were running, he would actually get put in jail, and he had this done to him numerous times. And there was one time where he actually had gotten into a fight, and people remember him dying, and it was an incredible news because of who he was and what he was doing for the community. And people swear that they remember him having a funeral. It was majorly televised, and it was an insanely big deal. Now, you can imagine their surprise when they hear that he's actually alive, and he didn't even die until 2013, when they thought he died back in the 1980s when he was in prison. So he was a really amazing guy, and he ended up doing great things like starting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that investigated human rights abuse cases, and he did a lot after he got out of jail after the 1980s. So we're really lucky that he actually didn't die. But how do so many people remember him doing it, and how do they remember it being televised? Why do they talk about it with friends and family who maybe now don't even remember that happening? So there's a lot of examples of this. So I have just a list here in front of me. So a lot of people who are younger, who grew up with Pokemon, do you remember Pikachu having a black tip on his tail? Without looking it up. I did. But he doesn't. He doesn't have a black tip on his tail. It's totally yellow. And Sex and the City, a lot of people remember being Sex in the City. C-3PO, he had a silver leg. He wasn't totally gold, which a lot of people do remember. And for all you Disney fans, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. It didn't happen like that. It's actually Magic Mirror on the Wall. Lots of people remember Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. It's on merchandise, and even a real-life movie was based on that one line, the title of it at least, and it didn't even happen. Luke, I am your father. It was no, I am your father. There wasn't Luke in that sentence at all. And Interview with a Vampire, everybody remembers that, right? The Anne Rice book. I love that, both the book and the movie. But it's actually Interview with the Vampire, not a vampire. It's really easy misremembrances like this that a lot of people just pass off as saying, well, I mean, it was a lot of years ago, I'm probably just remembering it wrong, right? And that's something that people had thought for so long until this magic age of the internet came along, and people could combine their memories with other people. And yeah, things like the Berenstain Bears that I mentioned earlier, it's actually spelled Berenstain. And this is huge because they couldn't have just changed the name, or it's not such a simple thing as the author titling it something different, right? Because their actual last name is Stain. They copied it after themselves. Anyway, okay. There was a Sinbad Genie movie that I remember when I was a kid. Sinbad the comedian, he was a genie in a video very, very similar to Kazam, where Shaq plays in it. But I remember him, and I remember all his mannerisms when he was playing it, how he interacted with the kids. It was extremely similar to that movie, but he's never done a movie like that. And I did my research, and he actually cameoed on a show where he was a genie, but it wasn't remotely the same. It wasn't in the same like clothes or anything like that. So there's also the famous Forrest Gump line where he says life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But he never actually said that. What he said was life was like a box of chocolates. That's what his mom said. Life was like a box of chocolates. It's not what I remember. It's not what a lot of people remember. And Oscar Mayer, we all remember that song, O-S-C-A-R. It's actually M-A-Y-E-R, not M-E-Y-E-R. So a lot of people have totally different memories than an entire section of populace. So it's not only like a couple of your friends sort of maybe remember this, it's a thorough 100%, this cannot be wrong, this is what happened. And when it happens to so many different people, it can't be denied. And even in your own personal lives, think about when a friend or a family member says, you're remembering that wrong, that didn't happen, you said this and then I said this, or things relative to that, right? But you know 100% that that's not true. You know in your head that that's what happened, and you just brush it off. You say, okay, sure, one of us is wrong, that's fine. Things like this, what it actually comes down to, and the exciting ramifications of the Mandela effect, is that we could potentially be switching timelines. And that's kind of a conspiracy theory, but in the spiritual community, it's very widely accepted that parallel realities and different dimensions do exist, and they are existing right now. So literally parallel to what we are living, there is completely different realities, all with the smallest minute detail changed, that changes a huge generation, potentially sometimes. What actually happened back in 1954, there was this guy from a country named Torrid, and he was immaculately dressed, he was a businessman, Caucasian, he was flying in from Japan, going back to Europe, and he said, I've done this so many times, I work for this company, and they actually stopped him and they said, hey, let's see your passport, like airports always do. And the crazy thing about this is that Torrid doesn't exist. It's not a country. And they're like, how do you have a passport from a country that doesn't exist if you're just trying to, like, fool us? Why wouldn't you pick a country that actually exists and then get a passport forged from that country? That makes a lot more sense. He said, no, Torrid exists. It's been a country for 1,000 years. I make this trip all the time. I'm a business person. And they actually looked at the business that he works for. It doesn't exist. And they showed him a map for him to show where Torrid exists, and he couldn't. He pointed to a different country and said, it should be here. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine getting off of a flight that you think is absolutely mundane, you've done it 5 times before, this exact thing, and they say, Canada doesn't exist. What are you talking about? The United States doesn't exist. So this guy was very upset, understandably, thinking, you guys must be pulling my leg or something, this doesn't make any sense. So they actually put him in a hotel room overnight with guards posted out front. And this room didn't have any way out. There was no ledge in front of the window, and it was up a lot of stories, so he couldn't have jumped out the window without him literally dying. And in the morning they went to go get him and he wasn't there. So this is a theory that's not commonly associated with the Mandela effect, but I think it is part of it because it seems as if he had switched dimensions and then went right back into where he came from, in my opinion. So I'll actually get a lot into parallel realities and the implications on you and your life later. in a different video. This has been long enough. But the Mandela effect. How is it actually going to affect you? And have you ever experienced anything like this yourself? Comment that down below, but I'll actually give you more information about the differences in parallel realities and the widely accepted truths about them, at least in the spiritual community. So I'll talk to you guys later.